The stagecoach pitched sideways, iron wheels screaming against stone and ice. And Eliza Brennan understood with sudden clarity that she was going to die on this mountain without ever having truly lived. The realization came not as terror, but as a kind of hollow disappointment. 6 years of 14-hour factory shifts in Boston, her hearing half stolen by the loom's metallic shriek, her lungs coated with lint and coal dust, her youth ground down to exhaustion. All of it leading to this, a nameless death on a frozen Colorado trail on Christmas Eve, 1864. Her body to be found in spring thaw if the wolves left anything to find. The coach lurched again. Through the frost-glazed window, she glimpsed the drop 200 feet of empty air, down to where the river ran black and savage through the gorge. Its voice, a constant threatening growl beneath the wind. Her gloved fingers locked on the seat frame. The wood bit into her palms, even through the thin cotton. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, rapid as a rabbit's heart. Outside, cowboys fired revolvers at the Stars' drunk celebration Christmas joy expressed in gunpowder and whiskey. One shot cracked too close. The lead mare screamed and bolted. The team surged left. The world tilted. Eliza watched the Stars wheel overhead. She felt the sickening weightlessness of a vehicle beginning its roll. She smelled her own fear, sharp, acrid animal. Then the driver threw his weight against the reins with a roar that was half prayer, half curse, and somehow, impossibly, the horses found purchase. The coach slammed back onto the trail with force enough to crack her head against the seat frame. Stars exploded behind her eyes. She tasted copper. When motion ceased, she sat perfectly still, her breath coming in small, wounded gasps, while the driver wrenched open the door. Whispering Pines, miss. His voice carried no apology. Near death was weather here common as rain. She climbed down on legs that refused to bear her weight properly. The cold was a physical thing, a presence that wrapped around her throat and squeezed. Her shawl, adequate in Boston, might as well have been spider silk here. She looked up at the town that the marriage agent's letter had promised would be her salvation. Whispering Pines huddled between dark ridges of pine and the frozen curve of the river, like something trying to make itself small. False front buildings lined a single street, already churned to frozen mud by wagon traffic. Smoke rose from perhaps 20 chimneys, torn apart immediately by wind that came howling down from the peaks. Higher up the western slope, mine lanterns marked the earth's wound. A shaft driven into the mountain in search of silver men, burrowing after wealth with the same blind determination as worms. She pulled her shawl tighter. It accomplished nothing. The cold here had teeth. On the ridge above town, hidden in shadow and pine, Wakiza watched the stagecoach arrive and knew he was looking at death in a white dress. Not death as corpse, but death as process. He had seen it before. The trader's wife who had lasted one winter before the loneliness drove her to walk into a blizzard. The missionary's daughter who had smiled through weeks of fever before drowning in her own lungs. White women who came west with dreams as fragile as moth wings. And the frontier broke them the way a man might break kindling casually without thought, because that was the nature of the place and the nature of fragile things. This one would last perhaps 2 months, he judged. She was too thin, her movements too hesitant. The shawl she wore was an insult to winter. She clutched a small bag to her chest as though it contained something precious. Probably it held only a letter marriage contract, most likely one of the increasingly common arrangements, where Eastern agencies shipped women west to men who needed wives, the way they might need mules, as tools as property, as solutions to practical problems. He had come to Whispering Pines, hunting his sister. Onawa had left their winter camp 6 months ago with a fur trader who had spoken passable Lakota and made promises of a farm near the river, a place where she might raise horses. She had been 20 years old and full of cautious hope. Neither she nor the trader had returned. When Wakiza had finally tracked the traitor to a camp near Denver, the man had been drunk and belligerent. The squaw ran off, probably found herself a cavalryman. You people got no sense of contract. But in that same camp, another traitor had spoken more carefully. And drunk, he had mentioned Whispering Pines and women who came on marriage contracts, but never married, who vanished into mining camps in the mountains, who became names in ledgers rather than wives in houses. So Wakiza had come. He had questions that required answers, and he was prepared to be patient because patience was a kind of weapon sharp as any knife. The woman in white walked toward the saloon. The door swung shut behind her. Wakiza waited. The wind drove snow into his face, hard enough to sting. He did not move. The paint mare beneath him shifted her weight and settled. They would wait as long as necessary. Time was something they had. Answers were what they needed. Below, lamplight flickered in the saloon windows. Inside that building, something was beginning, something that would require blood and fire to finish. But neither the woman in white nor the man on the ridge knew that yet. They were still strangers. They had not yet learned what they were capable of becoming together or apart. That knowledge would come soon enough. The mountain would see to that. The Black Hills Saloon wore Christmas like an ill-fitting coat. Pine garlands hung over the bar, already browning. Candles guttered in tin holders hammered from food cans, their light uncertain and mean. The room smelled of wood smoke and spilled whiskey and the particular sourness of too many men in too small a space. Eliza stood just inside the door and felt every eye in the room catalog her and find her wanting. A tall man materialized at her elbow. "Miss Brennan." Not a question. He already knew who she was, had been watching for her arrival. "I'm Bertram. The gentleman you've come to meet will join us shortly." His hand on her shoulder was proprietorial possessive. His smile showed too many teeth. "Make yourself comfortable." She let herself be guided to a chair at the head of a long table. The wood was scarred with initials and obscenities carved by men with knives and time to kill. She folded her hands in her lap and tried to make herself invisible, a skill learned in the factory where being noticed by foremen meant being docked wages or worse. The men at the bar studied her with the frank appraisal farmers might give livestock. She kept her gaze down and counted her own heartbeats. Across the room near a window fogged opaque with condensation, Dr. Samuel Aldrich shared a table with a man who commanded attention simply by existing. The Lakota warrior sat with his back to the wall, the position of someone who had learned that exposed backs invited knives. His buckskin coat was worn to butter softness, his dark hair braided with strips of trade cloth. He ate methodically, chewing each bite as one who had known real hunger, but his eyes never stopped moving. 3 women in a year, Aldrich said quietly, leaning forward. His voice barely carried past their small table. All came through on marriage contracts Bertram arranged. All ended up at the number 3 mine camp. One tried to leave. They found her in February frozen. He paused. Briggs called it accidental death. Wakiza's jaw tightened fractionally. His gaze flicked to the woman in white seated alone at the long table, then back to Aldrich. "The agency operates out of Bertram's back office," Aldrich continued. "If the supposed husband backs out, the woman still owes the travel debt. The debt is always more than she can pay. They offer her work at the mine camp. The debt never decreases." He met Wakiza's eyes. "Your sister I heard about a Lakota woman last spring. She went up to number 3 a week after arriving. I'm sorry." Before Wakiza could respond, the door crashed open. A man stumbled in, reeking of whiskey, his face flushed crimson with drink and cold. He squinted at the long table at Eliza, and his expression curdled. "That's her." Daniel Pritchard's voice carried to every corner of the room. "That's what you brought me from Boston." Bertram moved quickly, his smile fixed. "Mr. Pritchard, perhaps?" "I asked for a young girl, pretty, unspoiled." Pritchard swayed, caught himself against a chair. Not some factory-worn woman who looks like she's buried 2 husbands already. He spat on the floor. "I won't take damaged goods." Laughter rippled through the room. Cruel laughter, the kind that draws strength from another's humiliation. Eliza sat motionless. She did not look up. In the factory, the foreman had taught her this skill, how to endure public shame without breaking, how to let the words hit her and fall away like rain on stone. Her face burned. Her hands clenched tight enough that her nails cut crescents into her palms. But she did not move. Bertram's hand settled on her shoulder, heavier now. "It appears there's been a misunderstanding, Miss Brennan. The contract is void, but you still owe for the ticket, the meals, the arrangements." His voice dropped to a murmur only she could hear. "We have a place where you can work that off. Up at the No. 3 camp, laundry, cooking, good mountain air." 2 men materialized behind her chair. The trap's teeth closed. Across the room, Wakiza set down his fork with deliberate care. Aldrich's hand shot out, gripping his arm. "Don't. Walk over there without legal standing, and they'll hang you before dawn." Wakiza looked at him for 3 heartbeats. Then he stood. Silence spread through the room like spilled water, conversations dying in concentric circles. A Lakota warrior in a white man's saloon on Christmas Eve was spectacle enough to command attention from even the drunkest miner. Wakiza crossed the room with the unhurried grace of a man who knew exactly how dangerous he was, and sat directly across from Eliza. Lamplight pooled between them. Outside the window behind him, snow fell through darkness in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Eliza looked up. Their eyes met. She had never seen a man sit so still while radiating such absolute awareness. He looked at her the way a hunter might study tracks, carefully reading everything, missing nothing. "You say she must marry or work your camp." Wakiza's English was precise, each word chosen with care. He addressed Bertram and the watching room. "I ask in front of witnesses, can she be my wife?" For a moment, shocked silence. Then laughter, harsh, mocking. It died when Wakiza reached inside his coat and drew out a leather pouch. Silver coins spilled onto scarred wood. He added a folded paper bill of sale for a mare horse. 3 tanned pelts, soft as silk. The sum was easily twice any imagined debt. The room held its breath. Daniel Pritchard's face went purple. "You can't hand a white woman to a savage like she's cattle at auction." He lurched across the room and shoved Wakiza's chest with both hands. Wakiza stepped back, absorbing the force without losing balance. "You did not want her. I do not buy a horse and leave it in your stable." His voice was calm as winter midnight. "The debt is paid? She can choose?" Daniel swung. His fist grazed Wakiza's jaw. Chairs scraped, a gun cleared leather. Marshal Briggs fired once into the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down. "Enough." Briggs's voice was iron, wrapped in exhaustion. "The debt's paid, properly witnessed. If you don't like who's buying Pritchard, you should have married her yourself." Miners dragged Daniel back toward the bar. Bertram swept up the coins and pelts with quick, greedy hands. "Legal enough. Witnessed." Wakiza turned to Eliza. Up close, she could see the scar through his left eyebrow, the weathering at the corners of his eyes. "You don't know my name," she whispered. "I know you don't belong to him." He tilted his head toward Bertram. "I know what waits at his camp. That's enough." Eliza looked at the men behind her chair. She looked at the door to the back office where other women had signed their names and disappeared. She thought about what laundry and cooking might actually mean in a mining camp far from law or witness. Then she looked at this stranger who had just spent his winter's wealth to give her a choice, the first real choice anyone had offered since the factory foreman had told her the looms were being replaced and her position eliminated. "Then I will be your wife." The words felt foreign in her mouth. But they were the only shield available in a room full of wolves. Briggs grunted. "Witnessed. Get out before someone changes their mind." Outside, the cold struck like a fist. Dr. Aldrich waited with a wagon, a tired mule in traces. "Take this. Follow the river trail north 5 miles. My hunting camp marked by white stone. Safe for tonight." They left town at a walk. Behind them, Daniel Pritchard stood in the saloon doorway, bottle in hand, watching them go. His face held the particular hatred of a man publicly humiliated. He would remember this. His pride demanded it. But that reckoning would come later. For now, the wagon carried them into darkness, and the river's voice followed them north like a promise or a threat. The rifle shot cracked through frozen air. The mule bolted. Eliza twisted on the bench seat and saw Daniel Pritchard swaying in his saddle 100 yards back, rifle raised. He fired again. The bullet whined past and struck pine trunks, spraying bark. "Hold on." Wakiza's voice was utterly calm. He snapped the reins. The wagon hurtled forward. The trail narrowed, pressed between rising slope and river's edge. Another shot. The mule veered toward the water in panic. The ice groaned. The runner broke through. Black water erupted. The mule screamed and lunged. The wagon tilted toward the hole, toward water cold enough to stop a heart in minutes. Wakiza swore in Lakota and sawed the reins. His knife flashed, severing the left trace. Eliza moved without thought, threw herself forward, grabbed the rail, shifted her weight right. The wagon teetered on the crumbling edge, runners shrieking. Then Wakiza hauled the mule's head around with both hands and his full strength, and the animal lunged. The wagon scraped past the break with inches to spare and lurched onto solid ground. They did not stop. A mile. 2. Finally, Wakiza pulled the mule to a halt in a clearing sheltered by pines. Eliza's hands were locked on the rail like claws. She could not make them release. Wakiza climbed down stiffly. His right boot was soaked black with river water. He said nothing, just checked the harness with methodical care. Eliza forced her hands open and slid from the seat. She stood on legs that felt made of straw. "Thank you." Her voice shook. "That water would have killed me." Surprise flickered in his eyes, as if he had not expected her to speak to him as an equal. "You helped. You chose to fight. That matters." They stood together, breath steaming. And for the first time, she saw him not as rescuer or stranger, but as a man who had just risked death for her, and was now trying to hide the pain of freezing flesh. "Your foot," she said. "We need fire now." He nodded and began gathering wood. By the time they reached the winter camp lodges, arranged in a pine hollow, smoke rising from smoke holes, horses picketed in a cleared area, Wakiza could barely walk. His foot had swollen grotesquely. When he finally removed the boot, the skin was mottled red and waxy white. Frostbite. An older man watched with a face like carved stone. Menawa, Wakiza's uncle. He spoke rapid Lakota, gesturing at Eliza. The meaning was clear. Bringing a white woman here is madness, suicide, an invitation for soldiers to burn us all. Wakiza answered, his tone calm but absolute. Menawa grunted disapproval and turned away. Eliza sat by the fire, feeling the weight of watching eyes. The women moved around her like water around stone, neither hostile nor welcoming, simply wary. She understood. She was white, a stranger, and white strangers had brought only death and broken promises. Her presence was a knife pressed to their throats. But she did not make herself small. That woman, the factory girl who had learned to accept abuse because resistance meant starvation, had died on the frozen trail when she chose to fight the wagon's tilt. This woman would not apologize for surviving. When morning came and Wakiza tried to stand his leg, nearly buckled, Eliza picked up a water bucket without asking and carried it herself. When firewood needed hauling, she took the heavier end of the drag sled. She did not fuss over his injury. She simply worked, and in working showed she understood the only currency that mattered here, strength and the will to contribute rather than consume. Wakiza noticed. He said nothing, but sometimes she caught him watching her with something that might have been approval. 3 days passed. Supplies ran low, flour, salt, ammunition. Someone would need to trade in town. Wakiza began preparing to go alone. Eliza stopped him. Walk into that saloon and all they see is Lakota with pelts to sell. I'm the one they dismiss. Let me listen. I can hear things you cannot. After long silence, he nodded. Stay close. If shooting starts, you run to Aldrich's office and lock the door. They rode into Whispering Pines at midday, when the street was crowded. At the trading post, Wakiza sold furs and bought supplies. Then he went to the livery. Eliza slipped away. She moved through the saloon with practiced invisibility. A card game roared at the center table. Bertram polished glasses behind the bar, his smile fixed in place. She drifted toward the back, pretending to seek the privy. Voices leaked from a closed door. Low, careful. The voices of men counting money or plotting crimes. She crept closer. Through a 2-inch gap, she saw Dietrich Slight, pale-haired, immaculately dressed, bent over a desk with Bertram. Between them lay a ledger. The last shipment was delayed by snow. Dietrich's voice was soft, almost gentle. We need 3 more before spring, or the number 3 foreman will complain about inadequate services. 2 letters already sent, Bertram said. Fresh arrivals by February. Dietrich turned a page. Eliza leaned closer. She glimpsed columns of names. Women's names. Beside each date's sums notations. Margaret O'Neill, advance $40. Transfer number 3, laundry contract, 6 Mosumers served. Susan Cole, advance $35. Transfer number 3, debt increasing. Near the bottom, Eliza Brennan, advance 50, rejected contract, debt owed. Her breath caught. $50. The ticket had cost $12. The arrangement is efficient. Dietrich continued. The women cannot leave until accounts are cleared. Winter makes the roads impassable. No one hears complaints. If a few stay permanently, well, mining is dangerous work. What about the German girl who ran? Bertram asked. Unfortunate accident. The marshal understood. Then Eliza saw another name, Onawa. Lakota, transfer number 3, special handling required, debt 60. A floorboard creaked beneath her foot. Dietrich's head snapped up. Who's there? She ran. Down the hallway, boots hammering wood. Shouts erupted behind her. She burst out the back door. A gunshot cracked. Wood exploded above her head, showering her with splinters. Wakiza appeared at the alley mouth, leading the mule. He saw her stumble, saw the gunman raising his weapon. He yanked her behind freight crates as another shot sparked off iron wheel rim. They were pressed together, chest to back, so close she felt his heart hammering. How many? She gasped. 2. More coming. He shoved a barrel toward the alley mouth. It crashed into the first man's knees. Eliza grabbed a board and heaved it upright as the second man fired. The bullet thunked into wood instead of flesh. Go! Wakiza hauled her toward the mule, vaulted into the saddle, dragged her up behind him. They tore out of the alley at a gallop, gunfire and curses following. They did not stop until the town was lost behind them and the trail climbed into pine shelter. That night, by lodge fire, Eliza recreated what she had seen. She had no paper, so she used birch bark strips and charcoal. She wrote every name she could remember, every sum, every notation. Her hand shook when she wrote Onawa's name. Wakiza read slowly, his face hardening. When he finished, he stared into the fire for a long time. I told myself she had found a husband, that she was safe. His voice was barely audible. I told myself comfortable lies. Late that night, hoofbeats. Dr. Aldrich arrived, his horse lathered. The town's in uproar. Bertram's offering $20 for information. Briggs is under pressure to form a posse. He spread a crude map on buffalo hide. Number 3 is here. Main shaft on a ledge with a ravine below. The laundry camp, 6 shacks inside a stockade. No bars needed. Winter is the prison guard. He looked at Wakiza. If you go openly, they'll kill you. If you involve Briggs, he'll arrest you both while Dietrich makes the problem disappear. The territorial capital doesn't care about women who signed contracts. How long for an official investigation? Wakiza asked. Spring, maybe summer. Wakiza shook his head. If we wait for papers, she dies before anyone opens the letter. Eliza studied the birch bark pages. She realized she was not just a witness. She was the only literate person who had seen the ledger who could explain it. Without her testimony, Dietrich could burn the evidence and walk free. If you go for her, she said, I go too. They wrote my name in that book as surely as Onawa's. This is my fight now. Menawa made a sound of contempt from the shadows. But Aldrich spoke up. If you do this, you'll need someone who can explain that ledger to a judge, assuming any judge will listen. Wakiza studied her face. It will be more dangerous than anything yet. I know. I'm coming anyway. He nodded once. We leave in 2 days, before the next storm closes the road. They prepared with obsessive care. Scouts mapped the guard posts, the wagon schedules, the shift changes. Eliza practiced with Wakiza's spare rifle until her shoulder was bruised purple, but her hands moved without thought. Aldrich brought medical supplies and a detailed map of the mine's interior information gathered over months by buying whiskey for talkative foremen. Menawa grudgingly gave Wakiza a .44 Army Colt and 30 paper cartridges. You bring shame if you fail, he said in Lakota. You bring soldiers if you succeed. Every path leads to disaster. On the final night, Eliza found Wakiza standing outside his lodge, staring at the distant mine lights. She stood beside him, close enough to share warmth. Are you afraid? She asked. Yes. Fear keeps you alive. The trick is not letting it control you. She thought about that. I used to be afraid of everything. Afraid of losing my job, afraid of the foreman, afraid I'd die forgotten in that factory. Now I'm only afraid of one thing, failing your sister. He looked at her. You won't fail. You've proven your courage already. You proved it when you fought to save the wagon. You proved it when you walked into danger to copy that ledger. She wanted desperately to believe him. But looking at those distant lights at the dark mountain waiting to kill them, doubt sat heavy in her chest. Tomorrow they would learn if courage was enough. At dawn they rode to town and found Marshal Briggs in the freight depot, standing in shadows away from the workers. His face was haggard. Eliza handed him the birch bark copies. He read slowly, his frown deepening. You're claiming these women were forced to work under false debts. The ticket from Boston cost $12. Bertram charged me $50. Look at every entry. He inflated every debt, then used those debts to force women into labor contracts. The debt never decreases. They can never leave. Briggs rubbed his face. Miss Brennan, I need you to understand my position. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and conflict. Dietrich owns half this town. The mine pays wages that keep families alive through winter. Without it, Whispering Pines dies. So you'll do nothing. Eliza's voice was sharp. I didn't say that. Genuine anguish showed on his face. I'm telling you the reality I face. If I move against Dietrich without ironclad evidence, he'll have me removed within a week. Whoever replaces me will be his man. He looked at the birchbark pages. Give me time. Let me take statements, send this through proper channels. He broke off. His 2 deputies entered, moving with purpose, flanking exits. I'm sorry, Briggs said quietly. Truly, but I have to take you both into protective custody. For your own safety. You're arresting us. Eliza could not believe it. We came for help. I'm keeping you safe while I try to find a legal solution. His voice firmed. Once you're in custody, Dietrich can't touch you. But Eliza saw the truth. Briggs was removing them while Dietrich silenced the women and burned the evidence. In a few months, this would be forgotten. One deputy reached for Wakiza's revolver. Wakiza stepped back. The deputy grabbed his wrist. They struggled. The deputy's pocket revolver discharged. The bullet smashed through a kerosene lantern. Fire exploded. Flames leapt up the supply crates. Within seconds, a wall of fire stood between them and the deputies. Black smoke filled the depot. Eliza's mind raced past the fire to what it meant: opportunity, perhaps their only one. She saw more crates stacked near the flames. Lamp oil. Handle with care. If those caught, the entire depot would become an inferno that would threaten half the town. Now. She grabbed Wakiza's arm. Go now. Shouts erupted. Workers ran for exits. The deputies turned away from pursuit, suddenly far more concerned with the spreading fire. Briggs was already yelling orders for a bucket brigade. Wakiza and Eliza ran for the side door, mounted their horses, and fled. Behind them, Briggs made his choice. Let them go. Save the depot, or half this town burns. The pursuit died. For the first time, Briggs had chosen humanity over orders. It was not heroism exactly, but it was a crack in the wall, a moment of decency from a tired man pushed too far. They rode hard. The mountain waited ahead. The blizzard struck when they were halfway up. It came with shocking suddenness, clear air one moment, white chaos the next. Wind roared down the gorge, driving snow with force that made breathing difficult. The temperature plunged. Visibility dropped to feet. Wakiza dismounted and tied a rope around both their waists. He took the lead on foot, testing each step. The trail here was treacherous, narrow with sheer slope, rising left and deadly drop right, where the river roared far below. Twice his leading foot found only air. Both times he jerked them both back from the invisible edge hearts hammering. Eliza's skirts grew impossibly heavy with ice dragging like chains. Her legs burned, then went numb. She stumbled and fell hard, breath gone. Wakiza felt the rope go slack. He turned and hauled her upright through sheer strength. There's no camp if you die here. I can't carry you. You must move. She snarled a curse at the mountain and forced her legs to obey. When they finally saw lanterns through the storm, pale lights marking the stockade and mine shaft, Eliza's face was numb and her hands were frozen claws. They collapsed behind a boulder and stared at the camp. 6 rough shacks inside log walls. Women moving between buildings, hunched and broken, armed guards by the gate. Beyond the shacks, the mine entrance gaped like an infected wound. Near the largest shack, 2 men were dragging something through the snow. A woman, not moving under her own power. Wakiza's entire body went rigid. His hand found hers and squeezed hard enough to hurt. He had recognized something, some detail Eliza could not discern through storm and distance. They waited until full dark, until the storm intensified. Then they moved forward. They moved. The side gate's hinges were frozen. Wakiza used Aldrich's key traded for medical care, a debt repaid in betrayal. The key turned with a grinding sound the wind covered. Inside the stockade, the world narrowed bitter cold wood smoke, the crunch of boots on snow that sounded like drum beats announcing their presence. They moved toward the laundry shack as quickly as silence allowed. The door was unlocked. Why lock it? Where could these women run inside? Steam rose from tubs where women with bleeding hands scrubbed ore-stained cloth. The air was thick with lye that burned nose and throat. 8 women, all painfully thin, moving with the mechanical motions of broken things. They looked up as the door opened, eyes wide with immediate fear, the fear of people accustomed to punishment. Then Eliza stepped into lamplight. "My name is Eliza Brennan. This is Wakiza. We're here to help you, all of you. We're leaving tonight." For a moment, no one moved. They simply stared. Then one woman, Irish, late 20s, bruised face, said hoarsely, "You're lying. No one helps?" "I came," Eliza said simply. "We're leaving. Now." Wakiza had moved past this exchange, scanning faces with desperate intensity. Then he saw her. Onawa stood at the farthest tub, terribly thin, her face hollow. Her hands were cracked and bleeding. Her left eye was swollen, nearly shut, purple with old bruising. More bruises, handprints marked her throat and arms. Her dress was torn, exposing scarred skin. Brother and sister stared at each other. Neither moved. Then Onawa's face crumpled. She dropped the cloth and crossed the room on unsteady legs. Wakiza caught her. She pressed her face to his shoulder. She did not cry, perhaps she had no tears left, but her body shook with silent sobs. "How many can walk?" Eliza asked urgently. "Most of us," the Irish woman said. "Greta's very sick, fever 3 days." She gestured toward a corner where a woman lay, on rags, delirious. "We take everyone," Eliza said. "We carry anyone who can't walk. No one stays." They got 15 feet outside before someone shouted. A rifle shot cracked. The bullet struck sparks off a metal bucket near Eliza's feet. "Run!" Wakiza shouted. They ran through blowing snow toward the only defensible position, a timber supply shack near the mine entrance, sturdy walls, solid door. Women stumbled and helped each other. More shots cracked. One woman screamed, clutching her arm where blood soaked through. They reached the shack and tumbled inside. Wakiza slammed the door and dropped a beam across brackets, just as something heavy crashed against it. Bullets immediately began punching through plank walls, showering everyone with splinters. Outside, Dietrich's voice rose. "You're surrounded, surrender, and I promise fair treatment." No one believed that for a moment. Through wall gaps, Eliza saw 8 or 10 armed men taking positions. They had minutes before the men burned them out or shot through the walls until everyone inside was dead. In the corner, Eliza's breath caught 3 small kegs marked black powder. Handle with extreme care. Gunpowder. Blasting charges. Highly unstable, especially old powder sitting unused in a damp mine shack. A teenage boy, Niels, she learned later, peeked through a knothole. A bullet came through and tore through his shoulder. He screamed and fell, blood soaking his shirt. Eliza dropped beside him, ripping fabric from her dress. She wadded the cloth and pressed hard against the wound. "Hold this. Press as hard as you can. You'll survive. Look at me. You'll survive." At a wall gap, Wakiza tried to set up a rifle, but his frost-bitten foot wouldn't support him properly. He stumbled. Eliza saw. She crossed to him and took the rifle. "Tell me where to aim." He positioned himself directly behind her, so close she felt his body's heat all along her back. His hands settled over hers on the stock, adjusting her grip. "The lantern. By the gate. 20 yards, slightly left." She sighted, controlled her breathing, squeezed. The lantern exploded. Men cursed in sudden darkness. It was not romance. It was survival. But the awareness between them was absolute, each hyper-conscious of the other's breathing, heartbeat warmth. Outside, men tried rushing the door. Wakiza and two women fired through gaps, driving them back. But the shack wouldn't hold. The walls were thin, the door splintering. They had perhaps 30 rounds total. "We need another way out," Wakiza said tightly. Eliza forced herself to remember Aldrich's map. The maintenance tunnel should connect to the old mine workings. Working frantically while bullets punched overhead, they pried up floorboards. Beneath a narrow shaft, dropping into darkness. Down, everyone, down. One by one, women dropped into the tunnel. Eliza went first with a lantern. Onawa climbed down on her own power, refusing help. Wakiza went last, pulling boards roughly back into place. The tunnel was low and tight, forcing them to crouch. The air was thick with ancient dust. Behind them, muffled but growing louder voices. Dietrich's men had found the entrance. "Faster," Wakiza urged. The passage opened suddenly into a large chamber 30 feet across, supported by ancient timbers black with rot. Old equipment rusted in corners, and along one wall, stacked carelessly, a dozen small wooden kegs marked black powder. Blasting powder, probably decades old, left to age and become dangerously unstable. Wakiza studied the ceiling. The timbers sagged in multiple places, held by beams so rotten they crumbled at touch. He realized immediately a carefully placed blast could collapse the tunnel behind them without bringing down the entire chamber. It was a calculated risk, born of desperation. If he did nothing, Dietrich's men would execute them all within minutes. If he brought the ceiling down wrong, they'd all be buried alive. But doing nothing meant certain death. This way offered a chance. As if underlining the urgency, gunfire suddenly echoed from the tunnel. Dietrich and 4 men, spilling into the far end of the chamber, lanterns, casting wild shadows, weapons raised. Then with a sound like the earth groaning, part of the ceiling above the tunnel entrance began to sag. Cracks appeared. Dust sifted down. The gunfire had destabilized already weak supports. Wakiza made his decision in a heartbeat. He grabbed a powder keg 15 pounds, enough to blast rock. His hands were clumsy with cold and jangling nerves. He looked at Eliza. "I need your hands. Steadier than mine." She crossed to him without hesitation. He showed her what needed doing. Position the keg under the main support beam, create a powder trail leading away long enough to reach cover. His hands shook as he tried to pour a trail from a second keg. Powder spilled clumsily. Eliza took the keg. Her factory-trained hands, accustomed to precise work, poured a neat trail across stone. 20 feet. Just enough distance. Dietrich's men were advancing. One fired. The bullet sparked near Eliza's head, so close she felt its heat. "Surrender," Dietrich shouted. "I'll show mercy." No one believed him. Eliza finished the trail. She looked at Wakiza. Her heart was hammering, but her hands were steady. "Light it." He struck a match. The sulfur flare painted both their faces orange. For one moment they looked at each other, really looked, and something passed between them that had no name. "Run!" Eliza shouted. Wakiza touched match to powder. It hissed to life, sparking along the black line. They ran. Women scrambled over debris toward the far tunnel. Dietrich screamed orders, but his voice was drowned by the sound of the world ending. The keg exploded. Not clean detonation, but savage blast, old black powder igniting all at once. Thunder and pressure crushed the air. The support beam shattered. The ceiling came down in an avalanche. A falling timber 8 inches thick, hundreds of pounds, struck Wakiza's left arm. Eliza heard bones snap. He gasped and staggered. She jammed her shoulder under his good arm and hauled him forward with strength born of terror. They stumbled through choking dust toward pale gray light that marked an exit. Behind them, the tunnel collapsed completely. Dietrich's screams cut off abruptly. They burst onto the mountainside, gasping, choking on clean air that had never tasted so sweet. They had survived. Barely. But survived. The survivors stumbled onto the slope, Eliza, Wakiza, Onawa, Niels, 11 other women into air so cold it felt like inhaling glass shards. The blizzard had eased to scattered flurries. Deep drifts covered everything. The road down was barely visible, just a lighter line against white. Wakiza's left arm hung useless. Eliza fashioned a splint from a shovel handle and cloth strips torn from her ruined dress. His face went gray, but he made no sound beyond a slight hiss when she had to manipulate the arm. They lashed together a crude sledge from scrap lumber and ore cart wreckage. 2 exhausted mules pulled it. Onawa, too weak to walk far, was laid on the sledge with 3 other women. The rest would walk guiding with ropes. The descent began. Within minutes, they understood how perilous their situation was. The road was steep, icy. In darkness, it became nightmare. On a particularly steep section, the sledge began sliding uncontrollably. It careened toward the outer edge, where a sheer drop fell away. Eliza threw her weight against the downslope rope, leaning back with everything she had. On the opposite side, Wakiza did the same with his one functional arm. Boots, scrabbling for purchase, face twisted as the motion jarred his broken arm. The sledge's runners shrieked. For 3 terrible seconds it continued sliding toward oblivion. Then the runners caught on rock jutting through ice. The whole thing jerked to violent stop perhaps 6 inches from the edge. No one spoke about how close it had been. They had all seen. They continued down nerves stretched to breaking. At a river ford in the lower valley, as sun broke over eastern ridges, painting snow pink and gold, they encountered Marshal Briggs, Dr. Aldrich, and a dozen armed townsmen on horseback. For one terrible moment, this seemed like the end. Guns were drawn on both sides, fingers tight on triggers. Briggs dismounted slowly. In his hand, the actual ledger. Dietrich's private record written in his own neat hand. "I grabbed this after you left. Bertram ran like a rabbit." He tossed it onto a boulder. "You got something to say about what's written here, Miss Brennan?" Eliza stepped forward. She was covered in rock dust blood soot. Her dress was rags, but she walked with her head high. She opened the ledger and began reading names. Her voice was clear and strong, the same voice that had said, "Light it," without hesitation. She read names. She explained columns, inflated debts, fraudulent transfers. She showed her own entry, Onawa's entry, Margaret O'Neill, Susan Cole, Greta Hoffman, and others. The miners shifted uncomfortably. Their faces darkened as they realized these women could have been their own wives, sisters, daughters. The system could have taken anyone. "Where is Dietrich?" one miner asked. "Buried in the mine," Wakiza said. "A tunnel collapsed during our escape. He didn't survive." Before Briggs could respond, gunfire erupted from riverside boulders. 2 of Dietrich's surviving foremen launched a desperate ambush. With Dietrich dead and the ledger exposed, they faced hanging. Better to die fighting. Bullets cracked. One deputy went down screaming. One freed woman cried out agrazed. Niels threw himself over Onawa, protecting her. Wakiza dropped to one knee, but with his useless left arm, he couldn't reload quickly. Eliza saw. She dropped beside him without hesitation. She reached for his ammunition pouch, began feeding cartridges into his good hand as he fired, counting softly, 3, 4, 5, so he'd know when to conserve his final round. Together, seamless, they helped put down the ambush. One foreman died on the rocks. The other, wounded, bleeding, broke and ran into the trees. He wouldn't survive the day. When smoke cleared, Briggs looked at Eliza at Wakiza with his splinted arms at the exhausted women. He looked at the ledger. He looked at the bodies. "Blast it all to perdition," he said quietly, and deliberately turned his back. Weeks passed. The mine entrance remained a dark scar visible from town. But no one worked it. No one approached it. Word reached the territorial capital within some weeks, carried down mountain by courier to the nearest telegraph office, then onward by wire. Dr. Aldrich's report followed by courier. The governor, keenly aware that mining scandals scared Eastern investors, seized the expedient path. He revoked Dietrich's charter on grounds of unsafe practices and systematic fraud. The shaft was declared condemned. Marshal Briggs filed his report carefully. He described the explosion as an unfortunate accident during mining operations, likely caused by improper powder storage. He listed Dietrich and 4 foremen as presumed dead bodies, unrecoverable. No mention of who triggered the blast. It wasn't complete truth. But it kept Wakiza and the women out of a courtroom where justice was uncertain at best. Frontier law was messy. This careful lie, was simply the least bloody option available. Bertram tried returning 6 weeks later. He found his saloon occupied by grim-faced miners holding ledger copies. They gave him a stark choice stand trial when the circuit judge arrived, or swing from the cottonwood tonight. Bertram chose the judge. He got 10 years hard labor, not because justice suddenly prevailed, but because the miners made clear that any lost paperwork would be answered with vigilante justice. Sometimes justice came through legal channels, sometimes through implied threat of violence. On the frontier, the distinction mattered less than the outcome. The burned-out No. 3 claim became tangled in legal disputes between distant investors. It was effectively abandoned. People began saying the ground was cursed, that men who profited from misery always came to bad ends. In late March, as the valley emerged from winter, Wakiza made a proposal. There was a flat bench of land beside the river, good soil, clean water. No one held title to it. No one wanted it given its proximity to the collapsed mine. But under squatters' rights, the tradition that said, if you worked land and lived on it, it became yours, people began building. Lakota families pitched lodges on the eastern end. The freed women, with help from townsmen whose consciences wouldn't let them ignore what had happened, built rough cabins on the western end. Dr. Aldrich donated supplies and time. Miners volunteered Sunday labor. Slowly, a community grew, one that belonged to no one and everyone. Marshal Briggs deliberately looked away each time a new structure appeared. When he filed reports, he noted the settlement recorded names asked no uncomfortable questions. It was easier and more human than explaining the complex truth. One evening in late March, as sunset painted the sky orange and pink, Wakiza came to find Eliza. His left arm was still stiff. It would always ache in cold weather, but functional. Eliza's hands bore fresh calluses from building the settlement. But her eyes were clear and bright in a way they'd never been in Boston. "Walk with me?" he said simply. They walked to a half-finished cabin positioned to catch morning and evening light. Inside, a single glass lantern hung from a beam, casting warm light across rough-hewn walls. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, and it was theirs. Menawa was there, stern but perhaps marginally softened. Onawa stood beside him, still thin but recovering. Dr. Aldrich had come, and young Niels. Townspeople stood in the doorway, and yard miners and wives, the blacksmith, the boarding house woman. People who had helped. This was not a formal church wedding. This was something older, perhaps more real, two people making a deliberate choice, witnessed to bind their lives in partnership. Wakiza spoke carefully in English, so everyone would understand. "When I first spoke in that saloon on Christmas Eve, I asked if you could be my wife as legal protection so no man could claim you and take you to that camp. That was my only reason. I didn't know you. I was using you as much as saving you." He paused when Eliza saw vulnerability she'd not seen before. Now, 3 months later, I ask again. But this time not because of law or contract. I ask because I've seen who you truly are. I've seen your courage when you fought to save us from drowning. Your intelligence when you copied that ledger and risked your life for evidence. Your strength when you fought beside me. Your compassion when you tended wounded strangers. Being beside you, working with you, feels more right than anything in my life has felt in a very long time. He took a breath. So I ask now, not as legal convenience, but as a man who has come to care for you more than he expected. Will you stay here with me and build a life together? Will you be my wife in truth? Eliza felt emotion welling in her throat. She thought about that blind date table, about Pritchard's cruel laughter, about seeing her name written as a commodity in Dietrich's ledger. And she thought about everything since the terror on the frozen trail, Wakiza's hand steadying hers on a rifle, the rope tied between them in the blizzard, and the way he'd never treated her as less than equal the moment she'd made the decision to light the powder trail. And he'd trusted her completely. When I came here, I was running from a life that was killing me slowly. She said, pleased, her voice was steady. I was looking for safety, for someone to protect me, because I didn't believe I could protect myself. I was looking for someone to save me. She paused. But I've learned something important. I don't need someone to save me. I needed someone who would fight beside me as an equal, who would trust me to be strong when strength was needed, who would let me make my own choices even when those choices were dangerous. She looked directly into his eyes. You gave me that. You gave me the chance to discover I'm stronger and braver than I believed possible. You treated me as a partner, not property. Yes, I will stay. I will be your wife truly and completely. But we do it our own way. No ledgers, no contracts written by others. No one owns either of us ever again. We choose this freely every day. That's what makes it real. Manawa grunted approval. Onawa smiled, genuinely, tears on her cheeks, but good tears. Dr. Aldrich nodded with quiet satisfaction. Townspeople began to clap and cheer. Marshal Briggs stood at the back. He had witnessed this union that wasn't legal in any technical sense, but was more valid than many church weddings. He smiled slightly, nodded, then walked peacefully back, toward a town content to let this corner of the valley operate under its own rules. Later that night, after the gathering drifted away, Wakiza and Eliza stepped outside their cabin. The night was clear and cold, but not brutal spring cold rather than winter. Snow still clung to high ridges glowing in moonlight, but the valley floor was clear and coming alive. The ruined mine was a dark scar against stars, a permanent reminder of what they'd survived, of the price paid for freedom of evil men who tried to reduce humans to ledger entries and paid with their lives. Wakiza couldn't offer her a painted fence or a judge-signed deed or civilized society's trappings. Only this hard-won stretch of riverbank. No one else wanted a half-finished cabin with mud-chinked walls and a simple promise to stand beside her, not in front as protector, not behind as follower, but beside her as equal partner, facing whatever came. Eliza slipped her hand under his good arm, feeling his solid warmth. They walked slowly along the line between their settlement and distant town lights, footprints side by side in soft earth, neither ahead nor behind, but together. No music swelled. No preacher delivered flowery pronouncements. Only quiet evening sounds, the river's murmur, an owl calling a dog, barking cook fires, crackling a child's sleepy voice. Just the peaceful sounds of people living. Perhaps the greatest victory of all. Eliza looked at emerging stars, at sharp ridges, at distant whispering pines lights. where this had all begun on a Christmas Eve that felt like another lifetime. She thought about the Boston factory where she'd been slowly disappearing, becoming invisible, nearly believing she was worthless because that's what she'd been told every day. She thought about the letter promising salvation, about the blind date table where Pritchard called her damaged goods. She thought about Dietrich's ledger with its neat columns of stolen names and fabricated debts, about Margaret O'Neill and Susan Cole and Greta Hoffman and others whose names she'd never know. She thought about black powder trails and collapsing tunnels, about the moment she'd said, "Light it," and committed herself to either freedom or death. Standing here with Wakiza's warmth against her side, with the smell of new earth and growing things, with her own cabin behind her and a community she'd helped build, she realized with absolute clarity that she had never been damaged. She had been tested, bent nearly to breaking, but forged in fire and ice into something stronger than she'd imagined possible. She'd discovered she wasn't a victim waiting for rescue, but a woman fully capable of rescuing herself and others. That knowledge, that certainty of her own strength and worth, was worth more than any deed or legal document. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked at her curiously. "For what?" "For giving me the chance to save myself. For treating me as strong enough to fight beside you rather than as something fragile needing protection. For trusting me with your life and your sister's life. For seeing me as I truly was, rather than what others told you I should be." He was silent, considering. Then he said simply, "You gave yourself that chance. You made the choices that mattered. I only opened a door you chose to walk through with more courage than most men I've known in war. The strength was always yours. You just had to discover it." They stood together in deepening twilight, two survivors on a riverbank, watching stars emerge over a valley that had tried with all its brutal power to destroy them and failed utterly. Behind them, the cabin door opened. Onawa stepped out wrapped in a blanket and called that the evening meal was ready. Her voice was stronger than even a week ago, still healing, but returning. Wakiza and Eliza turned together, moving with the unconscious synchronization of people who learned to work as a single unit, and walked back toward lamplight and warmth, toward family and food, shared among people who'd become more than friends. Somewhere high on the mountain, wind howled through the abandoned mine, a ghost crying over buried bones, over graves of evil men who'd learned too late that some people cannot be broken. But down here beside the river, in the growing settlement, people were already calling Freedom Bench. In quiet conversations, there was only the crackle of cook fires, the murmur of evening talk in multiple languages, distant laughter and bone-deep certainty that they'd won something precious and permanent. Not because they'd been stronger than the men who tried to break them, not because they'd been smarter or luckier, but because they'd absolutely refused, in the face of every obstacle and threat and moment of terror, to let those men define who they were or determine what they could become. They'd insisted on their own humanity when others tried to reduce them to commodities. They'd claimed their right to choose their own paths when others tried to sell them into slavery. They'd fought for the simple right to be seen as people rather than property. And in the end, in this hard country that respected only strength and perseverance, and the will to survive, no matter the cost, that refusal to be defined by others' cruelty was everything. The mountain had tested them. The winter had tried to kill them. Evil men had attempted to break them. They had survived. They had won. And now together, they would build something new from the ashes of what had burned. Behind them, the ruined mine stood silent against the stars, a monument to greed and cruelty. Yes, but also a testament to the truth that some things once broken cannot be remade. And some people once freed will never again accept chains. Eliza looked back once at that dark scar on the mountain. Then she turned toward the lamplight, toward Wakiza, toward the life they would build together. She did not look back again. There was no need. The past was buried. The future waited bright with possibility in the warm glow of their cabin and the community they had fought so hard to create. And for the first time since leaving Boston, for the first time perhaps in her entire life, Eliza Brennan was exactly where she chose to be, with exactly who she chose to be, with living exactly the life she had decided through blood and fire and desperate courage to claim as her own. That was worth everything. That was worth more than gold. That was freedom.